Hello there everyone, welcome to another video on the channel and welcome to a video where I'm going to try and outline and demonstrate to you that Gran Turismo 7's physics simulation model is maybe a little bit more complex and in-depth than you first realise. So when you mention the word physics in relation to a driving game, the first thing that people naturally think of is the way that the cars handle. Do they handle naturally? Do they handle realistically? But the physics simulation model of a racing game or driving sim goes way beyond just the way the car handles. It also includes the way that the car interacts with its environment, if that's the weather, the wind, etc. Now, Gran Turismo 7 will never be particularly well lauded for its driving physics. Now, personally, I think the way the cars handle in GT7 is pretty good, pretty nice. I love the way the cars drive, to be perfectly honest with you, even in relation to playing some of the other sims out there that are lauded for their handling physics. But one area I do think that Polyphony Digital does quite well is that wider, broader physics simulation model. It may well not get the glory or the immediate impact of a handling physics model, but in my opinion it's every bit as important to providing an authentic and realistic driving experience. So in this video I'm going to outline 5 things that PD do within their wider physics simulation model that should serve the purpose of proving that there is maybe a little bit more going on under the hood and that the physics simulation model of GT7 is more complex than you first realise. So number 1 on our list is going to be that wet lines are simulated in GT7. So if you're not aware of what that is, basically in motor racing, when the rain comes down, the track gets wet, drivers tend to take a different line around the corners because they want to avoid the rubbered in line of the racing line, because that becomes very slippy once the track gets wet. So this actually remains somewhat a little bit of a secret in Gran Turismo 7 for a long time. It was only really when iRacing started making a lot of noise about their new wet weather system coming in that some people actually tested the wet line in Gran Turismo 7 and actually found that GT7 was actually simulating the wet line. And as you can see in this video, as we go around Suzuka in the Group 3 Genesis, one using the racing line and one using the wet line, we actually go nearly a second a lap faster. What's also pretty handy now in Gran Turismo 7, with the recent addition of the data loggers, we can run both those laps through the data logger and compare them and see exactly where we are gaining that time. So a nice feature for Gran Turismo 7 in relation to showing just how effective those wet lines are. Basically, we can carry a little bit more speed into the corners because we're on the grippy part of the track, and then we have a little bit more grip as we exit the corner. So yeah, we gained almost half a second in turn 1, and then as we come up through the S's here, we can see that that delta continues to grow in the top right hand corner. So yes, the wet line is very much a real thing in Gran Turismo 7, and it's not something that is simulated in every racing or driving sim out there. So yeah, definitely a plus point for PD on this one. So next up I want to talk about bump drafting, because Gran Turismo 7 actually does bump drafting quite realistically. Now you're probably thinking I've lost my mind because in sport mode bump drafting isn't very realistic. However, in single player mode, bump drafting actually does work quite realistically. Now, if you do play sport mode, you will be aware that when we bump a car in front, we are literally bumping the car in front, and it gets an instant injection of 3 or 4 miles an hour, and then we use the slipstream to get back up to them again, and then we rinse and repeat that process. However, in real life, bump drafting works more like the car slips up to the car behind and then almost gets glued to the rear bumper, which then creates a low pressure under both cars. The car behind pushes the low pressure under the car in front, and then that reduces the aerodynamic drag of both cars, allowing them to reach higher top speeds. Now if you try and do this in Gran Turismo 7 with an AI car, it actually does work quite realistically. You kind of get stuck to the rear bumper and both cars will go 3 or 4 miles an hour faster than they can on their own. So I've bumped this car in front of us around Daytona Oval here, and we've done a 50.5, and going down the back straight, both cars, both the front and the rear car, we're doing about 178 miles an hour. So as we go for this second lap solo, you're going to see the impact that's going to have as we reach the first sector there. We're already a tenth and a half down, and coming down this back straight we are about 3 miles an hour slower. And coming through the second sector we are going to be 3 tenths down, and we're going to be a full half second down by the time we get to the line. So yeah, bump drafting in single player mode in Gran Turismo 7 actually works quite realistically, certainly as far as I can tell. Now obviously it would be great if we could have this model within sport mode. Sport mode does use a different car collision model compared to the single player, which does allow bump drafting to be abused. Also creates some situations with what people call the ping pong physics. However, I do believe that kind of collision model is actually designed to stop cars from getting spun out constantly from side-on contact, and it's not uncommon for racing games and driving sims to actually have a more forgiving collision model between the cars in online racing compared to the single player model. But it does show that PD can actually create quite a realistic car collision physics model, which makes bump drafting actually work quite realistically. Let's move on to number 3, and it's a very simple one, but it might be one that some people are not aware of, and that is that wind direction matters. So we join the Ferrari 296 GT3 down the Milzan straight on our way to the first chicane, and we have a strong tailwind pushing us down this straight, and as we come up to the first chicane we're going to reach 183 miles an hour before we hit the brakes. Jumping on to our next demonstration, we now have what is pretty much a headwind going down the same straight. Absolutely every other part of the comparison is the same, and you're going to see we're going to reach a much less top speed coming down into the first chicane, about 177. So quite a difference between the two tests there, and that's all down to that wind. So it's definitely something that is simulated within Gran Turismo 7, definitely something you have to consider when you are racing. Maybe you're missing your braking point, you're wondering why, it could be a tailwind, that is the reason. And speaking of the wind direction and the effect that has on the cars, the wind direction actually affects the slipstream strength. So we have moved to Special Stage Route X, and we are in the Ferrari F40, and we are going to see how long it takes us to use the slipstream to pass the car in front with a tailwind here. So moving out of the slipstream, and it's around about 1450 metres when we pass the car in front, and that was of a 2.9 metre tailwind. Now we move on to a headwind, which should mean that the slipstream should be stronger because the car in front is having to punch an even bigger hole in the air in front of us, and we can then see that we actually get a much more powerful slipstream and we pass the car, or get alongside the car, at around about 1300 metres. So just showing you the comparison there in the screenshot. Headwind around about 1300 metres the cars were pulling alongside, and with the tailwind around about 1430 metres. So quite a significant difference, and again just some little detail that PD implement into their physics simulation model that you might well not be aware of, and again in my opinion kind of demonstrating that things are a little bit more complex than people give the game credit for. Number 5, and lastly, we are going to move on to downforce versus fuel consumption. Now I must admit this was not a theory that I was aware of, but I was watching somebody, I can't remember quite who, play Le Mans Ultimate, and basically they were talking about running less downforce because it is more fuel efficient, or you burn less fuel. So I thought, well, let's see if we can put that to the test in Gran Turismo 7 and see if it simulates that realistically, assuming the theory itself is correct. Not being able to actually research it to find out, but it does make sense that if you are running less wing and creating less drag, that the car will maybe burn less fuel in the process. So a simple test here in the Porsche 962 at high speed ring. We're going to do 5 laps with maximum downforce on this first test. We chose this track because we have a very long run of full throttle all the way from, well, basically 2/3 of the lap is full throttle. So coming to the end of our 5-lap test here, we crossed the line with 27.6 laps remaining and 84%, and that was running maximum downforce, our best lap of 1 minute 0.7. So let's go back into the settings and we'll take 150 points of downforce off both the front and the rear. So 300 points less of downforce for our second test, and you can immediately see the impact here that we actually reach a much greater top speed down this straight. But we also are running into or certainly running more revs in 5th gear than we were in our previous test. So we are more slippy through the air, but we are technically running the engine at a higher level of revs as well. But come to the end of the test here, we are considerably faster for 1, but we can also see that the theory pans out. We've got 29.4 laps remaining of fuel and we have 85%. So we have, despite the fact that we're running more revs in 5th gear, the fact that the car is more slippy through the air has actually used less fuel, therefore proving the theory correct that running less downforce uses less fuel as well. So there you have it, folks. That is 5 elements of the physics simulation model that Gran Turismo 7 simulates quite realistically that you maybe weren't aware of, but also in my opinion kind of just proves that beyond the driving physics and the way the car handles, that Polyphony Digital are right up there when it comes to simulating the way that the car interacts with its environment in terms of physics. It's just a shame that something like the bump drafting that we're looking at here can't be implemented properly into sport mode, but yeah, I'm sure I remember playing Gran Turismo 5 and bump drafting down the Milzan straight, and it was nothing like the bump drafting we have now in GT7. So yeah, maybe there's hope for the future for that to get brought in. But yeah, let me know what you think about what we talked about in this video. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Are some of these wrong? Is there anything else you maybe noticed in your time playing the game? Keep the criticism constructive. If you are going to criticise, that's all I ask for. But thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Goodbye now.